Okay, welcome to our next installment here. We're going to be talking about networking with Stephanie Hockman, who is a fantastic guest and has some great experience to offer. And we'll be covering with respect to networking the purpose and mindset that you as a student need to bring, the tactics that you need to employ, and the pitfalls you need to avoid. So with that, welcome, Stephanie. Please give a quick background as to why you're the perfect person to have this conversation with.
Absolutely. Ben, thanks again for having me on. I actually am a recovering accountant, but then spent 15 years as an investment banker at Bank of America and BNP Paribas before shifting gears in 2015 to be the program director for careers in finance at Amherst College. I am now founder of Alvista Loop, which is an executive coaching and talent development business. And I think, one of the reasons why you and I thought about this conversation and why it was so important is partly because 15 years as an investment banker, I was having networking calls with aspiring analysts and associates and really thinking about the recruiting process and how networking fit in. And then in my 10 years at Amherst College, working with students about how to do networking, not only with alumni of that institution, but also non-alumni. And really, I think, networking is such an important concept that everyone needs to know how you do it, why you do it, because it's important from every aspect of the recruiting process.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Hey.
Well, fantastic. So let's jump into it. So we do want to start around the purpose and mindset they need to bring. I think that and the reason I would say that's important is because I've talked to a lot of students as you have, and you hear misconceptions about the purpose of networking. Everyone knows for the most part, they've heard the advice you need to go do it, but the deep answer of the why behind it, what's the true purpose, what are the real outcomes that I'm trying to create from the networking process, those tend to be less well understood until you've been doing it for a while. So what would you say about that? What are some of those clear, what's the benefit that you would describe to a student who is doing a great job over networking over a long period of time?
Well, and it's exactly what I've been doing. I mean, I'm 55 years old, so I've been networking for a long time, many, many decades. And it's about building relationships. It's about really getting to know someone over years and years and years and building that relationship. And that's what networking is. It's relationship building. It's not some transaction that you're trying to do. And so I think why it is important is partly because you want to develop relationships that you will have over your entire career and your entire lifetime. And it's also about exploration. You have to talk to a lot of people to figure out where you are in the spectrum of things that interest you. And if you're really exploring the finance industry, especially early on in the networking process, it's about exploration. It's about what is it about being an investment banker or a sales trader, an equity research analyst that I want to do. So you can read about it on investopedia.com or talk to your upperclassmen, which I think is a great thing. But talking to people who are actually doing the job is the best way to figure out if that's right for you, and asking really thoughtful questions, which I know we'll get into a little bit later. But what I would say about networking is it is about relationship building. It's about building that trust between two people. And as soon as they trust you, comes from consistent, genuine transactions, not kind of one-off, one and dones or transactions. And the more that you develop that relationship and they trust you, the more likely they are to become a mentor or a sponsor for you or help refer you through the process. To paraphrase one of my favorite people, Maya Angelou, it's about how people make you feel that will help you be remembered versus what you say. And so I think it's really that genuine connection that you're looking for in that relationship building.
Absolutely. Absolutely. People remember how you make them feel. They do not remember the exact words that you say. That is a very, very important truth. So yeah, um, and that's ultimately how you build trust. So great points there. So I think, if I could just paraphrase a bit on what you covered, how there's definitely there's different objectives as you go through the networking process, right? So first, your objective really is to talk to people and learn, right? Learn about the bank, learn about the different types of banks, the different industries, because you just don't know. And reading it on a websites are just notoriously ambiguous, even though they're made to look specific, but they're really not. They're hard to learn from. There's not much there because you'll just learn so much more from actually talking to somebody. But then I would also too, there's like the reps that you get of talking to someone in this industry. These folks are specialists. They have their own language, their own way of referring to different things. And you get that practice learning the language and speaking intelligently as which ultimately is a form of interview prep as well. And then you have sort of the last phase, which is like, well, someday you want to get a referral so that people will take your application seriously and make space for you in the interview process. And they take recommendations from the bankers. That's right, the simple way to put it. So I think that's probably different than what a lot of people expected to some extent, because a lot of folks, when they're just getting started, they think very transactionally and kind of quid pro quo. And it's like, oh, I'm going to call you, I'm going to be nice to you, and you're going to give me an interview, like, and it's just, maybe that would happen, but it's never going to happen in one conversation. But really, that's not the goal. Your goal really is to start off with that learning and advice piece. And at the end of the day, it is about building a genuine connection. A lot of mistakes I see are around, again, this assumption that it's quid pro quo. It's very superficial. They're just trying to get something quickly, when the opposite is true. It's the people who stand out, who follow up, who stay in touch. And that's what creates that trust. When you make multiple positive impressions, and you kind of, mentioned people the way people feel. It's like you're not necessarily trying to make them feel good about themselves. You're trying to make them feel good about the interaction. The feeling you want them to feel is, wow, this person's really well prepared. They're very thoughtful. They're very diligent. They're young and they don't know what they're talking about. And no one expects you to know what you're talking about. But they do expect you to have put the work in, done your research, ask thoughtful questions, and just show up as a professional, show up in a professional light, so that they think to themselves, oh, I could use this person on my team. I can see them working here. I can see them outperforming other people that are to my left and to my right. If you can create that feeling, that's the goal.
Yeah,
What do you?
absolutely.
Yeah, I don't know.
No, I think you're absolutely right. And an analogy I use a lot of times with college students is that networking and relationship building is a lot like dating. And it's something that, college students are always potentially looking to do, is develop that long-term relationship. And so when you think about networking or even in dating, you don't always find the first person that you talk to give you all the information that you want. Sometimes you need to date lots of different people to figure out who's the best fit for you. And that's kind of what networking is. And then as you progress with someone that you really connected with and started building that relationship, you might start to date more seriously and think about having these long conversations and more in-depth conversations that lead to, I don't know, maybe you end up going and becoming exclusive and getting engaged sometimes, and that's called the internship.
Oh, there you go.
And the job is getting married and that sort of thing. So it's one of those things where I tell students, I'm like, you wouldn't want to ghost someone, so you've got to follow up with them, right? You want to make sure that you're constantly having conversations with them, not every day and not every week. That it's not that kind of dating, but it is one of those things where we'll talk a little bit about how often you should be following up and that sort of thing, but you can't make it that one and done. If it's transactional, you won't leave them with the feeling that they're a person that you'd want to work with.
Right. Absolutely. That's an interesting analogy. I think it works on a lot of levels. The one difference is it is okay to date multiple people, right? Yeah. Not too many, but not too few. We want to have options, but no, that's an interesting way. It's a good point. So you're really saying like the relationship is going to develop over time, right? Yeah. And our goal is to deepen that trust and deepen that connection. Even if you don't ultimately end up working for that person, think 3 steps ahead. Another important thing, you said you've been networking your whole professional career.
Yep.
You're also building a skill set that will help you find new opportunities, new roles, new deals your entire career. And if you can build that up front, that's one of the reasons why investment bankers are successful in many different endeavors, is because they go through this and they learn these different skills.
Yeah.
So I have a question for you. So there's a debate, on quantity versus quality, and I think everyone has their own little perspective on that. So what would you say if a student is asking, where should I focus on? Quantity, getting as many messages out as possible, or quality and trying to go very, very deep with very few connections? How would you address that?
It's both, but I would say it's always quality over quantity. And I would say you have to look at it in a couple of different perspectives. One is when you think about quantity, it's not only the number of people at the firm that you're talking to. Talking to one person is great if you're talking to someone at ABC Investment Bank, but you may not always connect really well with them, and you'll want to talk to a second or a third person to triangulate, what is the culture within that firm? What is the job really like? But you also want to have quantity or a breadth of different firms that you're talking to, because the culture and the type of people that they hire varies dramatically. I worked at Bank of America and then BNP Paribas, and both of those firms had very different cultures, being an American bank versus a French bank. And oftentimes when people would come and network with me and ask, what is the culture like, which we can talk about questions that are ambiguous. That would be the worst question to ask about it. You want to really try and figure out anecdotes from them that express what the culture is. But those are questions that you oftentimes get asked, and I would be able to differentiate Bank of America versus BNP Paribas. And that's what you're doing on the student side, right? You're networking with lots of different people to start saying, okay, I really like this firm over this firm. And why is that? Why is it more aligned or attuned to what I'm looking for as a person? And only you can answer that. So I do think it's both quantity of people at each firm and quantity of firms. But what's really important is the quality. So you don't need to talk to every single person at an investment bank, but you do need to talk to a few people. And I would say people at different levels, analyst and associate level, VP, managing director level, because they have different perspectives of the firm and bring different things. But what you want to do is really dig deep and develop that relationship with them. So that initial conversation is oftentimes learning more, that exploration that we were talking about early, getting to know them getting to know you, and having a really curiosity-filled discussion with thoughtful questions. And then you'll have follow-up discussions to really build and to have deeper conversations about what's going on in the firm, what kinds of transactions have they been working on, and really show that curiosity. And to your point, Ben, become that person that they can see sitting beside them on the desk as an analyst on their team doing the next big M&A transaction.
Yep. Oh, exactly. I think to build on what you're saying, I think it's I couldn't agree more. The quality piece. If you don't have the quality, I would argue you're not going to get to the quantity.
Yeah.
Because if you have negative interactions or even blah, kind of neutral interactions with bankers, they're not going to be excited about introducing you to people. And you're just going to have a hard time getting traction. So I would argue that you have to start with quality, because the way you get to quantity is through high quality. Because if you have one really good conversation, they might introduce you to 2 or 3 people. Yeah. And all of a sudden, because I did really well in the quantity, my quantity actually got easier. And now I'm set up for success to have 3 more high quality conversations because I'm getting this warm introduction. But it doesn't happen if you're just going through the motions and just trying to talk to as many people as possible, answering your same 5 robotic questions. Tell me about the culture at this bank. Like, a good point. Like, that's probably the worst question you could ask, because it shows that you've done no research. There's worse. There's worse. There's always ways to go down, but I would say that question would be such a turnoff if I was a banker. Like, if I hear that, I'm like, oh God, it's going to be one of these conversations again.
Absolutely.
And it's instead of asking, because we're kind of shifting into tactics here a little bit. One question, if you want to know about culture, which you should, one question that I would recommend folks ask is how do you differentiate yourselves from a competitor? When you guys are pitching for business, who are the typical 2 to 3 banks it comes down to, and how do you guys win when it comes right down to the finish line? And that's more of a business-oriented strategy type of question. But what I've found is that it reveals many deep characteristics of the bank and their culture and how they operate and how they're effective. Because at the end of the day, your true point of differentiation has to be deeply connected to the culture. And it's going to be a great conversation. And they should have fun answering that question, because a lot of these folks are very competitive, right? They love beating the competitors, and they have their theories as to why their client did this or that, and it'll be a fun conversation. So if you want to, your goal is to learn about culture, but probably you don't need to ask it directly.
Yeah, you don't. I oftentimes find that from a tactical perspective, it's better to ask sort of pointed, very concrete questions versus the generic questions like,
Yeah.
We can talk about it at a later date at some point about tell me about yourself, which feels like such a generic question, but it's not if you answer it in the right way. Just as tell me about your culture is too generic, but tell me about, how you differentiate yourself in the sales process, especially to an analyst and associate that just completed their 15th pitch deck or,
Right.
and they can talk about their league tables and who they're competing against, or maybe they just finished a deal and they can talk about, maybe it was a co-led deal and they were working with another investment bank and how they differentiate as an analyst versus the analysts and associates they're dealing with another bank. So it leads to a lot of different questions that you can ask.
Yep, absolutely. Because there are differences between the bank.
Oh,
But you have within the bank, but you just have to have a number of conversations before you can actually start to appreciate the nuances there, because they are mostly similar. They do very similar things, but there are material differences.
There's only so many ways that you can do an IPO, right? I mean, there's regulations around it. There's so many ways that you can issue debt, but how you differentiate yourself, how your balance sheet works, it tells you a lot about the firm. And then also, when you get into those deals, how big are the deal teams, right? How often are they the lead, left runner or not? That sort of thing. So I think that becomes really important, especially if brand recognition or number of deals is important to the experience that you're looking for. And again, that's that exploration of what is important to you and matching that to the questions that you're asking.
Yeah, these are key points. I remember when I was going through the process of learning about Baird, where I ultimately ended up at, is those are some of the questions that really helped me answer the why Baird question down the road, because I learned through my networking that, Baird has this philosophy of one P&L. Okay, but you can memorize that and someone can tell you that and you can write it down. But what does that really mean? And how does it impact the deal process? And how does it impact how people work together on a daily basis? And the idea is that it's not just eat what you kill, meaning, one MD wins a deal and they get all the funds. It's actually all Baird, they get generally, certainly there's performance metrics and many things they're looking at, but broadly, you're getting compensated on how well the bank does as a whole. And so it encourages collaboration. You'll have 2, 3, 4 managing directors all coming together to work on one pitch, to maybe traveling together, turning the deck with the associates and the analysts all together. Whereas in some banks, that's not how they do it. And so you're going to learn that actually speaks to the culture of Baird and how it's more collaborative, kind of Midwest, sort of a vibe. But again, when you talk about how that question could come out of how do you guys differentiate yourselves? Well, we do one P&L. I can get 3 managing directors who really care and pay attention to this deal, who one is an expert in the subcategory of the industry, but another one is an expert in some of maybe these different types of buyers that are going to be high likely buyers. And the combination now is very powerful and difficult for clients to ignore.
Yeah.
But okay, so let's talk a little bit about timeline. Lots of questions, what should I be doing my freshman year? What should I be doing my sophomore year, my junior year? How would you start to answer that question?
Well, I think first and foremost, remember that during the summer months, June through the beginning of August, anyone that you're reaching out to that works at an investment bank is already dealing with the interns they have that summer, and they're really, really busy. So I try to craft a tactical strategy and timeline around that, so you're not bothering them when they're already inundated with lots of interns on their desk and vacations, because summertime is a great time for vacations as well. So when I work with students, whether when I was at Amherst College or working with them now at Alvista Loop, I really think about it in class years. So as a first year or a freshman, I would say you really should be spending your time talking to upperclassmen, those juniors and seniors that have gone through the process, and really sort of crafting your questions to sort of get good practice. I think that's a great way to sort of put on some training wheels, get good at networking with people on your own campus, and doing that in the fall and winter time of your freshman year. And then as you get into spring of your freshman year, really start to reach out to alumni or people that upperclassmen suggest that you talk to. And that's, a really good time to have that initial conversation, have that exploration, determine, do you want to be an investment banker? Do you want to be a sales trader? Do you want to do equity research? Those sort of exploratory conversations are happening in March, April, May of your freshman year. And then again, you're not really doing a whole lot during that summer months because, again, they're really busy and hopefully you've got something else you're doing over the summer, like doing more financial modeling, accounting work, and being a lifeguard or a camp counselor, whatever you're doing during the summer. But when you come back to campus in August, September, October of your sophomore year, it is full on recruiting prep as well as networking. And so what I usually say is if you talk to someone in April, you're probably talking to them again 3 to 4 months later in August, September, having a follow-up conversation. And that's really building on that initial conversation you had. And then by the time you're getting into November, December, and in January, when all the applications are opening up for your junior summer internship, is when you're having those continued in-depth conversations, referral conversations. Really, you've developed that network where they can see you being at the firm and you're telling them, hey, I'm going to be applying when the application's open on January 1st. If there's anyone else I should be talking to before then, that's when you want to be talking and networking with them. So between your freshman year and January, February of your sophomore year, you've probably had 3 touch points with certain alumni. Early conversations, exploratory, follow-up conversations in the early fall, and then more in-depth referral type conversations in your winter time, early spring of your sophomore year. Now, if you're a junior and you're getting late to the party, meaning you didn't start your freshman year, that's absolutely okay. And I would think in those situations, if you are in the fall of your junior year, you're recruiting fast and furious and you're talking to seniors and as many alumni as you can because you're trying to recruit for that junior summer internship about 6 months later than some of the investment banks, but it doesn't mean that they aren't already looking for additional attributes. So I think networking becomes really important. I think the only thing I would add to that, Ben, is that in certain situations, if let's say you went through the process in your sophomore spring and you recruited and you didn't end up with a junior year internship and you're that junior fall, that's when you stay in contact with your networks. That's when they can be really helpful because maybe the firm you talked to didn't have as many interns where they gave offers to. Maybe they didn't have a great intern class. And it's through that networking that gives you that opportunity to find an internship for your junior summer when you might not have been in, or maybe when you went through that initial process. But it's through networking and those connections that you made that help you land that job even in your junior year.
Yeah, that's a good point. Many good points there. I think a lot of folks would, if they don't kind of come through that sophomore year with the junior year internship 15 months in advance of the internship, I'm sure they'd be really discouraged. But there are a number of banks that do more just-in-time. Not only do the big banks somewhat sparingly add people later on, maybe someone declined an offer or they have more growth than they expected and they add a slot. So those things can absolutely happen to get added after the fact. Less common, but certainly within.
Well, I will tell you 2 years ago, I think for the class of 2024 graduating class, there was an investment bank that had, call it 50 interns in the summer of 23. Mm-hmm. And this is just a good example. They had 8 of their interns choose not to accept their return offers. Wow, and they were going to various private equity firms, that sort of thing. So they came back out and had to re-recruit from seniors. And that was, that's just a perfect example of sometimes what happens even after the junior year internship, even as a senior. It's those networks that really come into play and help you land something when you didn't think it was even a possibility.
Yep. Make those good impressions that will come back to help you.
Networking makes a big difference because if you develop that trust and that long-term relationship with them, you're going to be front of mind when the HR person comes and says, we just had 8 people that didn't accept their offers. Who do you know that's still out there looking? And they're going to turn to you. So I think that's just another great example of why networking is so important.
And those are just the larger banks. Like you said, a 50-person internship program is a relatively large internship program. The banks that only take 2 to 4, almost every time, 90% of the time, they're going to be hiring within a few months of start date. Even you might even go into the spring of your junior year and get an offer then. But you need to be very aggressive early on in your junior year if you don't have anything quite lined up yet. But definitely open up the aperture because there really still is a great deal of opportunity.
Yeah, and it's all about continuing to develop those relationships and staying in touch with people saying, I didn't end up landing an internship through the initial recruiting process. Please keep me in mind. Those sort of follow-up conversations, asking for advice, that sort of thing is always super important.
Now, I get a lot of questions on that talking to students. one of the most common tricky questions that requires some nuances. I've talked to this person once, but my second conversation, it was hard to get a hold of them, or I guess they didn't really know what they were bringing to the table
Mm-hmm.
to talk about.
Yep.
They just sort of reached out as an automatic saying, okay, well, let's set
Yep.
up another call. But it left the banker wondering, why are we doing this,
Okay.
a little bit? And so the questions I've gotten really are like, how do I set that up? How do I frame that call? What are the best ways to follow up via email or setting up additional coffee chats or anything with that same contact who I've already connected with once earlier?
Yeah, it's a question I get oftentimes as well. And what I would say is, remember, it's about relationship building. So asking them about a recent deal that they've done, or saying, "Hey, I'm really interested in becoming an investment banker at ABC firm. I noticed you guys just closed this deal, something you've read in the Wall Street Journal or in Morning Brew or whatever," and reaching out and saying, "Hey, you may not know much about this deal if it's in a different group, et cetera, but would love to talk to you about how the firm really approached such a landmark deal." So reaching out about deals or articles that you're seeing in the newspaper, really making it a conversation and demonstrating your curiosity around the industry, I think is extremely important. And then I think, you always want to leave, something from the initial conversation that you're going to
Yeah.
follow up on,
Mm,
right? So what was it in that initial conversation that really, resonated with you? And maybe it was something about the culture. Maybe it was something about the deal team size. Maybe it was something around, thinking about promotions. Maybe you're talking to an analyst who's thinking about doing the A to A, the analyst to associate promotion. And, you're now at the point where it's going through the process. Maybe you're following up saying, "Hey, just wanted to see how things were going with the review process. Would love to hear more about how the firm goes through the review process." Because again, that will tell you about the culture of the firm and the feedback loop and that sort of thing. And asking about, things that they're seeing within the industry. I mean, the industry is constantly changing, right? So if I was networking right now, one of the biggest things I would be asking people is, we're in the middle of a government shutdown, right? How is that
right.
impacting deal flow? How does that impact things that companies are thinking about? Just as when tariffs were levied, that was an influence. So what are some of the things that are going on in current events that are good conversation points, right? Because they want to talk about it. And they want to know that you're curious. That's one of the biggest things that when I was an investment banker, I looked for was, did you ask thoughtful questions? Did you ask, questions that made me really think about the answer instead of giving you my patent answer that I could give to anyone?
Right.
Those are the people that really stood out. And those are the people that I've kept in contact with even to this day. I mean, there's a young lady I hired at BNP Paribas out of NYU, and she was a dance major of all things, and a competitive figure skater. And I love keeping in contact with her because it's just so much fun thinking about what she's going through day in and day out. But it's somebody that she just really struck a chord with me when we first had a conversation.
Yeah. Well, that's important. That's a great way to be remembered, right? Just be an interesting person. Talk about the things that are
Absolutely.
unique to you. That shouldn't be the major focus, but you need to
Right.
leave them with something.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they won't remember who you are. But yeah, I can
Yeah.
definitely see myself remembering the competitive figure skater that I talked to in a networking call.
Yeah.
That's definitely someone who's going to stand out. And I've told folks, students like that too. Like if you come from a non-standard background, like turn that into a strength. Like
Cutie.
that makes you easier to remember. These bankers are talking to all kinds of folks. If you have the exact same background and come from the same, things as everyone else, you're gonna fall in, you're gonna be easily forgotten,
Mm-hmm.
or easily looked over, not because there's anything wrong with you, but just because, you're not differentiating yourself.
Yep.
Um, but one thing that you tapped into that I would add to is you said when you follow up, refer back to that previous conversation. And I think that a lot of students really miss an opportunity to do great with that.
Mm-hmm.
What bankers, and let's just go back to basics here. Bankers are busy, as are most people, but like especially busy, their time is very valuable. So if you can find a way to communicate to them that you used their time previously and really got something out of it and they had a positive impact on you, that feels great for them because now they're thinking, wow, this person listens, they're thoughtful, they didn't waste my time, this is the kind of person who I can see working with me.
Mm-hmm.
And the way you do that is refer back to something they told you to do as advice, show them that you did it, and then show them that you had a positive outcome because of that.
Yeah.
Right? They might say whatever it is, but they might say, "Oh yeah, you need to go talk to this person." They didn't even make a warm intro. They kind of gave you a homework assignment. Go contact them. You can drop my name. Come back and say, "I talked to this person. They were amazing. They helped me in this way, and that way, and this way." And now, So, and the other small thing I would add to that is you don't even need to ask for a conversation to follow up.
Yeah.
One of the tactics I recommend, since we're talking about tactics, is actually don't ask for anything.
Yes.
Maybe a month goes by. You talk to someone, a month goes by, maybe 2 months, but you have updates. Things have happened. Maybe you've changed your thinking about where your focus is. Maybe you're looking at a new city that you weren't looking at before. Maybe you had some achievement. You completed your Adventist financial modeling certification. Maybe you were elected president of your club. But in any case, there's some type of update with you. I highly recommend folks reach out to those 10 people you networked with and just give them an update. Say, "Hey, this is me. We talked back in April. You were really helpful when we talked about blah, blah, blah. Since then, the biggest update for me is I'm looking at both Chicago and St. Louis for different boutique banks, and excited to stay in touch." Done. And instead of asking for something, you've given them something. You've just given them an update. You stay on their radar. But people are human. Like, they like those types of updates and just informational things. Now, don't write 5 paragraphs, right? Keep it short. But now it's just as a banker, I think, "Oh yeah, I did talk to that person. Okay, cool, great. I'm glad they're doing well. I'm glad that that conversation was helpful. It looks like they're on the right path." And I think that to myself, they probably won't even respond,
Yeah.
but that's okay. It still hit their eyeballs, and again, you haven't asked for anything. You're sort of giving them something,
Yep.
and it keeps keep things more positive. The worst thing you can do is not the worst, but a mistake that is made frequently is they're asking for more time with no why behind it, and
Right.
it just it kind of gets back into just going through the motions.
No, and I think you're absolutely correct. And when we kind of think about that timeline we talked about, that initial conversation that's happening in the spring of your freshman year, for example, that follow-up that you're doing in the early fall is oftentimes not an ask for an additional conversation. It is that follow-up of, "Hey, I finished my summer internship doing this. I finished my Adventist certification. I'm now really working on all my technical preparation for my interview process. But I was actually reading this article about a firm, or a deal that was recently done, and thought I'd share it with you because it's something I'm looking at in doing my own financial model of to see why they're doing this particular transaction," or something along those lines, where you're just keeping them updated on things or sharing an article with them. I love that tactic. Oftentimes we talked about 3 touch points, and they're not all conversations. They're just
Right.
touch points.
Right, and just an email update is
Yep.
absolutely a touch point.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
and what's better for you is the student networking is you can send 10 of those in a half an hour, and you're
Hmm.
only going to change a couple words in each email, and now you've just got 10 touch points. It didn't take you that long. And again, you're building a brand. Think of this like a business. This is a marketing and sales process, and
Absolutely.
you've got to go get got to make those customer touch points. So sticking on tactics,
Yep.
shifting a little bit more towards the sequence of these conversations, looking to start with easy, I call safe conversations, and then get more into the difficult or higher risk conversations. Walk us through how you view on that, and how you guide students to approach that.
Yeah, and I think that kind of goes back to, quality versus quantity and kind of getting your teeth into things as well. As I mentioned, I would start with upperclassmen at your educational institution, because seniors have just finished, or they're about to, go off into the world as a full-time, but they've completed their internship for the summer. And talking to them about what they liked and disliked about their firms, and really having those initial conversations with seniors on your campus is a great way to sort of put the training wheels on, get comfortable with the conversations, start to get a feel for the different banks, the different positions that are there. And then I would move on to analysts and maybe associates at the different firms. And oftentimes that can be alumni of your institution. It can also be people that are, warm invites from, any social capital conversations that you might have, family members, et cetera. But oftentimes it's your alumni. And, at Amherst College, I said, even look at LinkedIn for extended alumni. And by that, I mean, if it wasn't an Amherst College alumni, maybe it is a NESCAC alumni, somebody from Williams or a competing institution, but a similar institution. And I would talk to a couple of analysts and associates and really understand what the day in and day out is like, and then graduate into talking to VPs and managing directors. And I think the reason is sometimes you won't have a choice, but maybe the managing director is the first conversation you had, but you're going to be a little bit nervous in any networking call, the first one. And so it's better to have kind of built up to it with seniors first, then analysts and associates, and then moving on to VPs and managing directors.
Yep, absolutely. That's so important. I think there can be exceptions, like you said. Maybe you do a managing director, it's a family friend or somebody, but you just have to go in knowing that that person's almost like a trusted person already. And they know where you're coming from. They have very low expectations about the conversation. But if you reach out to a managing director cold and they somehow you get through and it gets scheduled and they CC their assistant and now it's scheduled, like that person's going to have very high expectations for that conversation. And that's where obviously you can go wrong, right? Is in essence, you've overpromised and underdeliver if you're not ready for that conversation. And the way you do that is by building experience, getting reps, and talking to those safe folks. I mean, definitely, it's the classic advice everyone hears, but the alumni network, you have to start there. Yep. If you haven't talked to 10, 20, 30 alums, then you're just wrong. You're just wrong because you're always going to get the benefit, not always, but many more times you're going to get the benefit of the doubt. There's an inherent natural bias in a good way towards alum of your same organization, and take advantage of that. Like, that's a good thing. They want to promote their alma mater. They want to help you. You're going to have a lower standard to meet, and they're probably going to do more to help you on average. You'll see exceptions, of course, but on average, I would say that's true. So don't be too eager to go outside the alumni network until you've really built some reps.
Well, and you've got a natural connection already, right? You can, I went to the University of Texas, so if somebody reached out to me from UT, the first conversation I'm going to have is lamenting about our loss this weekend, right, in football. Right. So, you have that natural connection and commonality that makes the conversation easier. And they understand the type of institution you come from, the type of educational background you have. And it does, to your point, give you a leg up. So I think talking to alumni is absolutely important.
Absolutely. Let's see here. Okay, so getting into a couple more things here. I guess so. What recommendations do you have for when you get through? So the alumni information, you should have access to that through your school's programs, so you can get the names and contact information. It's a little easier. But then as you move into more broader networking, higher risk, where you're doing more cold outreach with people who you don't have any connection with, what tactical advice do you have around finding contacts? How do you get those email addresses? What are some of the recommended tools and tips that you have there?
Well, I think LinkedIn is a great resource that you can sort of figure out if somebody is, at a certain firm and, were they part of sort of your extended network. So again, it could be a college similar to your college. It could be maybe you're from the same hometown. Maybe you both, where they went to high school is where you went to high school, even if it was 10 years prior to that. So I think there can be different areas that you can find commonality. Maybe that you both were orchestra members in college or something that you're finding on LinkedIn that allows sort of a connectivity. Because when you send that initial, high profile or, harder email to send, you want to create some personal touch to it. So in addition to putting something in the subject line that grabs their attention, and it's not just student seeking informational discussion, right? That's nice. So you can say, fellow Longhorn, right? Having been at University of Texas, fellow Longhorn wanting to reach out, that sort of thing. So I think those are sort of the subject line is really important. And then I think in the actual email that you're sending to try and set that initial connection up, it's got to be brief. It cannot be paragraph upon paragraph because, again, everybody's busy. But it needs to be succinct. And why are you reaching out to me, right? It's not, especially if it's not an alumni of my institution, then why did you pick me out of the other people at Bank of America that you could have reached out to? And maybe it's because I'm a woman in finance and you're a woman that's aspiring to be in finance. And maybe we're connecting and wanting to talk about the trials and tribulations of being a woman in finance. What is that commonality between us? That becomes really important because when I read a cold email, I got to know why you're reaching out to me, because otherwise it's just another one of the 400 emails I get in a day. And why am I going to respond to you? So make a connection when you can. I think that's important.
Put yourself into the shoes of your audience, right?
Absolutely.
And think about, that's a really good point. The point of connection is so important. What I recommend for folks when you're structuring that cold email is you just need 3 parts. You need that point of connection. How are you connected to this person? It could be a very strong connection, like a lifelong family friend. That's a very strong connection. But it could be a very superficial or relatively weak connection. Like, hey, we both went to the same school. Even though you graduated 20 years ago, that's not really part of your life today. It's still a type of connection. Or it could even be we both share a common interest, or we have some sort of common trait or something in our background. That's common. But the first question people think when the email comes in, the first thing, and this is just like instinctual, I think, who in the world is this? Who the heck is this? Right? Is this a spammer? Is this legitimate? Who in the world is this? When you highlight that point of connection, you're answering that question proactively. Then the number 2 thing I recommend is making sure you have an ask. Why are you reaching out? What are you trying to get out from this person? I'm looking for advice on blank. I'd like to have a discussion about blank. Put in there something very specific, because it answers that question like that you just highlighted as to why have you targeted me? What knowledge or experience or advice do I have that can benefit you? And being clear about that up front. And then number 3, logistics. You got to close with logistics. Here's 3 dates and times. And I'd be curious to see if you have a different approach. I recommend that they put 3 dates and times, or 3 dates with multiple times on each date, in that first cold email right away. And some students will say, "Oh my gosh, I was worried about that because I didn't want to be too forward. I didn't want to be too presumptive." I'm just like, no, like make their lives easier. Because when you don't put that closing information, that logistics information of dates and times to connect, you're actually giving them a homework assignment. You're making them go through their calendar and find a bunch of dates and times and do all this work, when really, if you put the dates and times in there, all they have to do is reply Tuesday, 3:00. That's it. And you've lowered the barrier to what it takes to actually get that meeting on the calendar.
Well, and you're lowering the back and forth that happens, right?
The burden.
So I agree with you. I think that it's really important that to give them 3 options. 3 is just the magical number. It seems like I think we can all come from consulting backgrounds in times, but everything is in 3s. But what I tell students is, if you are going to give them 3 options, block it off on your calendar, because what you don't want to happen is them to come back and say Tuesday at 3, and now you're already booked. And so 100%. I actually was talking with someone yesterday, and we were talking about, well, if I send 5 emails with 3 time slots in each, what if one of those 5 comes back and picks a slot already? Well, you have to
It can't happen.
No, you have to have strategy behind it. So you need to have, I usually say, if you're going to have 5 emails that go out that you're trying to connect with 5 different people, you need to block out about 10 hours on your calendar for those different options. And, you'll cross back and forth, but you just need to give them the different times. And so when you're in the height of networking mode, you should have, call it 10 hours blocked off on your calendar every week, and you're just trying to slot it. Now, if you don't slot something in one of those hours, great, you get your hour back to go do your studying or go work out, whatever it is that you do. But I do think it is important to put that in. The other thing I like to add into the end of the email is, I know your time is valuable. Here are 3 times, but I will be available when is most convenient for you if none of these work. And own that, right? Yeah. And recognize, and don't give times that are like 8:00 at night, guys. People want their alone time. Be thoughtful around it. Also think about, if you're going out to sales traders, think about the times you're giving them. You're not giving them at the open at 9:00 in the morning, right? You don't want to give it at 4:00 in the afternoon at the close, right? Think about what their job is like and what would be convenient for them. If you're going out to an investment banker, you certainly don't want to send an 8 a.m. option because most of them are still sleeping then. At the same time, you might be able to give a 5 or a 6 p.m. option for someone like that because they tend to be working a little bit later. So just know your audience. We've said that a couple of times, but you do want to close in that way. And then the other thing tactically, as we're talking about tactics, I like the structure, the 3 parts that you talked about. The other question I oftentimes get asked is, should I include my resume in that initial email? I don't agree with that.
Yeah,
I
I would say
actually
no.
think it's just gets lost in the shuffle of things. What I think is a better tactic is, let's say they come back and say, Tuesday at 3 works for me. You then send a calendar hold, right? You send them a calendar invite for Tuesday at 3 o'clock and attach your resume to that. So that 10 minutes before they're going into the initial conversation with you, they've got your resume there that they can look at before you guys have a conversation. So that's just another tactic that I think is really important.
Oh, that's a great tactic because 100% when the meeting's popping up, they get the 15-minute alert reminder that it's coming up. Then say, oh, wait, who is this? What is this again? And then they're clicking into it. Oh, wow, there's a resume here. Put some bullet points in there, maybe about your school, your background, your recruiting goal.
Yeah.
Just give them a little bit to chew on. That's a great tactic. Yeah, I totally agree. Don't send your resume up front. If anything's presumptive, that's presumptive. You're presuming that they even care, that they want to look at it, that it's relevant for them.
And it just gets lost anyway.
And that, they're not going to come back to it anyway. But a lot of times they'll, obviously, a lot of times more reason they'll ask for it. You'll get the call scheduled and they're like, send me a calendar invite and send me a resume. That'll be a common thing that you'll see. And then obviously when they ask for it, now you're cleared hot to go ahead and fire it over to them.
Yep, absolutely.
That's good stuff. In terms of a tactic, definitely LinkedIn. I mean, there's nothing wrong with LinkedIn messages. LinkedIn is one of those tools where if the person is too far away from you as far as your network go, if they're not a third order connection, you're not really even going to see them. Yeah. And so you have to get out there and build connections. We'll start with your alums, your people, and then once you start to build it, you'll get access to actually more bankers in LinkedIn. So it's really important that you start with the LinkedIn connections early, often. Be disciplined. Every person if you speak with someone and contact them cold at the end of the conversation, I recommend sending a LinkedIn request after you talk to them.
Yep.
Put a little note in there. Thanks so much for your time, blah, blah, blah. And then that will actually give you access to more people on LinkedIn as you go through time and create those as your second and third order network grows bigger.
Well, and a really interesting tip, if you are a phone user, right, and you are on LinkedIn and you just finished a great conversation with John Doe and you want to send a LinkedIn invite and you're on your phone, you can't actually add a note when you're connecting with somebody using your phone. You have to be on a computer. So
that's right.
I think it's really important to send that note, say, thank you so much for the conversation. It's really helpful. I look forward to staying in touch. You want to add that personalized note. It's that extra connection point, that relationship building that demonstrates that you show respect for who they are, that you respected their time, and that you really appreciated all the information that they shared.
Yeah. No, this is so important because I think a lot of younger students, they don't start off thinking about LinkedIn.
Yeah.
And they maybe just really start touching it when they get into college and get really serious about recruiting, and some not even then. But what happens when you send that message with the connection request, when they hit accept, it actually goes into their messages.
Mm-hmm.
And they see it along with all their other messages from their friends or from wherever. And it's just an easy way for them to refer back to it and be like, oh, wait, when you contact them later or you have this meeting scheduled, now they can go back to your LinkedIn profile and be like, who in the world is this person? And they can just do a quick refresh. But that gets a lot harder when you don't include that message. So yeah, use the laptop, use the desktop, and send that message along. That's a really great point. One other tactic, I've heard differing reviews on this. I think it's an important one to know about. I don't think you should solely rely on it. But to what extent do you advise students to use what I would call the email syntax trick, where if you talk to let's say I talk to one Baird banker, let's use Baird as an example, and I know that it's rwbaird.com, and I know the person's name is John Smith, and it's jsmith@rwbaird.com. And then I find some more names of people I want to talk to, but I don't know their email addresses. Do you recommend people just try the syntax and just use that same pattern of the email address so that you can just cold email somebody without actually getting their email address?
You can certainly try. Not every firm is going to bounce it back, so you won't know if it actually went through. Sometimes it will, sometimes it won't.
Yep.
Another neat little trick that I encourage students to do is, there's this thing in your hand called a phone. Use it for what it's intended to, which is as a phone. Call the main number. The receptionist will answer, say, I'm trying to reach out to John Smith. Would you mind giving me his email address? Oftentimes, they'll just give it to you by picking up the phone and calling. So that will be another way of getting the actual email address.
Huh. That's it. No, I have not heard that. I love that. That's fantastic. I haven't heard of asking for the email address for a call and talking to somebody. I think that's brilliant.
Yeah,
And if
it's
that doesn't work,
amazing.
worst case scenario, they're like, well, I can't give you that, but I can put you through to their voicemail. And then
Exactly.
bang, now you're ringing their desk. They might even pick up.
Yeah,
But if not, you can leave a message and, go from
yeah.
there.
And just introduce yourself. I mean, you have to be prepared for that, but I'm a big fan of actually picking up the phone and calling people.
Yeah.
I
Well,
think it
especially
develops a human
especially now because a
relationship.
lot of students aren't doing that.
Yeah.
It's not in their comfort zone. Certainly most, speaking broadly, I have three kids who are, 25 to 18, and they're mostly like this, especially my youngest. He was trying to get a hold of someone for a possible job opportunity, um, and he kept getting their voicemail, and he just hung up every time
Oh,
because he is expecting them to just pick up, and if not, he just was not in the mode of leaving voicemails,
really?
and he never got a hold of the person. He's like, yeah, I called them and called them and called them, and they never got back to me. And then I was like, okay, well, are you leaving voicemail? Like, no, I don't leave a voicemail. And then he called, left one voicemail. The guy called him back within like 60 minutes.
Yeah.
And so, just be careful because the things that are obvious to us like aren't necessarily obvious. But picking up the phone, leaving the voicemail, following up via email, calling the receptionist, asking to get through. These are all really important things. And a lot of times on the websites, it'll have their email address and phone number.
Hmm. Yep.
Because these bankers are salespeople. They want clients to contact them, and you'd be surprised how many times that information is out there. It might not be on there for the more junior people. A lot of times on there for the more
Yeah.
senior people. So be careful with that.
Yeah.
But cool. No, that's just there's great tips. I'm learning new ones here as well. What would you so we have a couple things before we wrap up here. I've got one more tactic to talk about, and then we'll cover a couple pitfalls and wrap
Sure.
things up. Um, in terms of a tactic during the conversation, you're trying to make a good impression. You want to have a dynamic dialogue. I think. So, what do you recommend in terms? I'll just give you one recommendation I make, and you tell me your thoughts and what are some different approaches that you've seen. But one way I like to do things is tell them you have to listen. Once you get the banker talking, they're going to start talking. You have to actually listen to what they're saying.
Mhm.
You can't just be petrified and wide-eyed and you know just listening and looking at your notes that you already took, and as soon as they stop talking, now you're terrified of silence, and now you ask some unrelated question to what they just said. You have to listen to the words they're saying. They're going to drop you some nugget, something that's interesting, something that's specific. And all you have to do is, and I recommend sticky notes because you don't need that much space. Take a sticky note, write down, oh, construction deal in Atlanta. Oh, new internship training program. Like whatever little nugget they're dropping. And then say, hey, you mentioned this construction deal in Atlanta. Tell me more about that. What
Mhm.
was the timing there? What was the outcome? I really want to, that was so interesting to me. And boom, now they're like, wow, this person's listening to me. We're having a deeper discussion. We're probing into nuances instead of keeping it at a superficial level and bouncing around from topic to topic. What would you
I
add to that?
absolutely agree. So going back to the very beginning where we talked about relationship building, right? When you're building that
Mm,
relationship, when going back to the dating analogy, right? Do you really want to date someone that doesn't listen to you when you're having a conversation and can't remember when your birthday was or when the last time you went to a football game was or whatever it happens to be? They want an indication that you are listening. So that active listening that you do is extremely important. So I like the idea of post-it notes, or I always have a sheet of paper where I'm scribbling on as we talk and just, reminding me of things like, oh, they have, three kids between the ages of 25 and 18. I'm going to bring that up next time and say, how are your kids doing in college? Or how are they doing that? Some personal nugget as well. But
yeah.
those follow-up questions become really important. I do think, you're always going to have questions that you want to ask, but you want to ask very thoughtful and curious questions. And doing another preparation technique for those conversations is doing your research, right? What you never want to do is ask questions that you could have done your own research on. So,
Right.
yeah, how long have you been at ABC Bank? Well, you can look at LinkedIn and probably figure that out for the most part, or look at their bio on, the website, whatever it happens to be. So do the research on the firm, do research on the individual. Don't stalk them. I mean, you don't need to go figure out that they're allergic to chocolate because of some post they put on Instagram, right? You could look at it, but it's not something you want to necessarily bring up. But you do want to do enough research that if, you get to the conversation and they say, well, what do you want to know? Then you have a question ready. I noticed that you have been at ABC firm for the last 15 years. What is the biggest challenge that you've seen facing the industry? Something along those lines where you're demonstrating that you've done your own research and that you respected their time and that you appreciate their putting forth the effort to have a conversation with you, that you did enough research. So I think doing research on the firm and the person is important. I think active listening during the conversation and then having a good set of very targeted questions are all really important. And then take really good notes. And sort of as we talked about, where you want to follow up with a thank you email, but then also follow up 3 or 4 months down the road with an update, you want to be able to go back to your notes that you keep in whatever your CRM of choice is. But what is it that you really took away from the conversation and bring that back into the follow-up? And the only way you're going to do that is if you take really good notes. And the only way to take really good notes is to actively listen.
Yep, absolutely. And just don't forget that this stuff is hard to do. Mm-hmm. You're not going to do it well when you just get started. You're just not.
Yeah.
But we're talking through relatively advanced techniques and topics that are not easy, and a lot of times don't come naturally, in a sense, because you're going to be nervous. You're talking to new people in a different industry. You're not going to know all the language, and so. Well, let's talk a little bit about pitfalls. I think one of the, there's so many pitfalls, but one of them, I would argue one of them is, it kind of ties into not being authentic, but don't try to act like you know everything. I think that a lot of younger folks struggle with that. They think that they have to sort of fake it until they make it, in a sense. Mm-hmm. They think they have to puff themselves up and act like they already know all these things so they don't seem unknowledgeable. But the problem is that that's so easy to see through. Mm-hmm. And it's so obvious. Once you have 10 years experience in an industry, the people who don't understand the industry, you can see them from a mile away. You can hear one word that they say and they don't use it quite correctly. And immediately you know that this person has no idea what they're talking about. And that's so obvious. So instead, take the opposite tact. Know yourself. Be comfortable in it. And if they say a word that you don't know, I'm not saying it's 100%. Like if it's a managing director and you're in an interview, maybe that's not the right time. But if you're in an early networking conversation with somebody and they say a word that you don't have a really good understanding of what it means, ask about it. Yeah. That's a beautiful opportunity to do exactly what we just said. Hey, you mentioned reverse mergers. Can you tell me more about that? I've heard the word, but I don't really understand much about it. Yeah. Boom. And now, again, you're showing that you've listened. You're showing that you're curious. You're showing that you're humble, that you're thoughtful, that you're listening, and that you want to learn. These are behaviors and skills that your employers want to see. Mm-hmm. I will tell you, the worst thing that you can do is hire someone who's overconfident and thinks they have all the answers, because that person they're terrible to work with, because the work quality gets really low because they don't ask questions. They don't follow up because they presume that they have all the answers. So be careful, because you might actually be exhibiting some behaviors that won't resonate with the bankers. So something to watch out for.
No, bankers are all, when I was a banker and having these networking calls, one of the things I was always looking for is, are they a good fit for the firm, from a personality perspective, but also, do they have a true understanding of what they know and what they don't know? Because I don't need a bunch of egos working on my desk, right? And so I always wanted somebody who was coachable and likable and that sort of thing. And if you're asking those questions, then you're wanting to learn. And I think you make a solid point, Ben, that it's extremely important to ask good questions. And, I actually think there are stupid questions that you can ask. But I think if they are coming from a point of really trying to clarify part of the conversation, there is no stupid question when it comes to that, because you're just demonstrating curiosity.
Right. Well, the stupid question, I think, let's talk about some of these examples of stupid questions, because it's stupid. It's not in terms of a point of intelligence or a point of industry knowledge, because everybody knows the deal. They've been through it. They know that you're just starting to learn. You don't even, you haven't gotten to the tip of the, you haven't barely even seen the iceberg from a distance. So, they know that. But what are some examples of stupid questions, and what makes them quote unquote stupid?
Well, I think first and foremost, I'll answer the second part of that question, is what makes it stupid is really the fact that you didn't do your research. You didn't do your homework. You didn't, understand. You should never ask, So tell me what an investment banker does. That should never be a question to an analyst because you can look all that up. You can talk to seniors on your campus. You should be able to figure out
Right.
what does an investment banker do?
Go to your investment banking club intro day
Exactly.
and take notes, and that will answer that question.
Or look at investopedia.com or any other, there's too many ways to figure out that. So asking questions that you could easily have done the research and answered is great. Now, if you do research and you want to ask more around a topic, that's fantastic. So I was doing some research on investment banking, and this is what I understand it to be. But I would love to understand day in and day out, what was your day like yesterday, right? So asking very pointed questions about a specific day versus tell me what the day in the life of an investment banker is. So really asking more pointed questions versus generic questions is a pitfall that I think a lot of people fall under. And then going back to what we talked about earlier, don't ask the questions like, tell me about your culture, right? If you want to know about culture, ask about how'd you get on your last deal? What was the deal team size like? What was, the getting up to speed? What was the mentorship like? You'll get a lot of information from just asking more pointed questions about a specific deal or a specific day on their calendar type thing. And I think, also asking contrarian questions is really important. Pitfalls come from, so what's the best thing you like about your job? Great. Everybody's going to give you the patent answer. It doesn't really show any forethought into the question. Yeah. I'd rather somebody ask me, tell me about the worst deal you've ever been on and what made it so bad. Or tell me about
your toughest day.
The toughest day. And you'll find out about, was it client was really difficult? Did you get reamed out by one of your managing directors about something you should have known better? Tells you a lot about firm culture, about the people that you work with. So I like asking very specific questions and very contrarian questions versus the pitfalls of asking something too generic or something you could easily have found out on the internet.
Yeah, I could not agree with you more on the contrarian questions because that's going to make them stop. And a lot of times the bankers will say, whoa, no one's ever asked me that. That's a good question. And if you get that, boom. I mean, that is what you're looking for, right? To make them stop, get them off of their automatic talking points, going through the motions. You don't want them to be doing that either. But I love it. Ask, what's your toughest day? What was the toughest deal you were on? And then there's so many follow-ups that can come to that. Oh, well, you know what? 6 months ago, I was on these 3 deals and this thing fell through and I had to redo all this work. And they're giving you real insight into what the toughest aspects of the job are really going to be. And subtly, you're also learning a lot because if you hear that and you're like, well, that's tough, but I could manage that. Now you know that this job could be a great fit for you, as opposed to you hearing that and you wanting to run away. So you're also going to learn a lot. But I love that in terms of creating a genuine conversation that's going to be unique and maybe even memorable for the banker.
And I would say another pitfall that I see with them is not customizing your questions for not only the individual, but where the individual is in their career, right? So the type of question you ask an analyst about the day in the life, what was your day like on Tuesday? You would never really necessarily ask an MD because that doesn't help you in what your day in the life is.
Right.
Any more than asking an analyst that's 1 or 2 years in their career, what's the biggest change you've seen in the industry, right? That's more of a question for a managing director. So know your audience, know the type of questions that you should be asking. I love asking managing directors, what is one attribute that you've seen that has caused analysts to not advance within the firm, right? Mm-hmm. That's sort of the contrarian question, but asking them, how do they see analysts, right? And how much interaction is that managing director?
What are the top 3 mistakes that analysts make in their first year?
Exactly. And those are great questions because it gives you insight into how they think about analysts. Also gives you advice on what not to do as an intern or as an analyst. But it also is demonstrating that you understand that they've been around a while and they've seen lots of different iterations of analysts.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's important. Consider the audience and what do they bring to the table and where are they, and building that into the questions. That makes so much sense. Yeah, I think we're certainly touching on a lot of the same concepts here, but it's just so important that we're emphasizing these foundationals. And the only thing I would add quickly to the pitfalls discussion, building on what you said, was when you ask those really generic questions, it doesn't mean that that's a bad learning objective. Like you are trying to learn about culture, right? You are trying to learn about a day in the life in a managing director, maybe, but you are trying to learn about these things. It just means you don't ask those direct questions. So the pitfall would be asking about the culture. It's too generic. So that's the pitfall. But with a small change, all of a sudden a horrible question goes to a great question. And that small change that I would recommend is you say something along, let's say you want to learn about culture. You could say, oh, hey, I talked to so and so who's also at Baird in this group, and they told me that you know the culture, their favorite part about the culture is that there's a one P&L and all the managing directors are very collaborative, and that impacts their day-to-day work in a positive way when they go pitch, and it da 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 da, and so and then you say, what do you think about that? Right? Have you shared that same experience, or maybe your experience has been very different? And now, so we're not really asking a question as much as we're making a statement and then getting their reaction to it. And that has a subtle, powerful effect too, because they can't blame you for that statement. So that statement doesn't have to be right. And in fact, you'll probably have a more interesting question if that statement is an outlier statement, a bit more contrarian or wrong. If someone says, something that they disagree with, now you're having a really interesting, robust conversation, and you're not getting quote unquote blamed for having the wrong opinion. You're saying, no, I talked to someone else. That's what they told me. What do you think? So,
and yeah. I think that is absolutely correct. And I love that when you can reference another conversation, because it also shows that you like that firm enough that you want to talk to multiple people at that firm, right? And it's demonstrating a curiosity and an interest in the actual firm, which makes them understand that you appreciate their time. I oftentimes get asked, well, what if I haven't talked to anyone else at the firm? Reference the website. I can't tell you how many times I would at BNP Paribas, their tagline was "Bank for a Changing World," right? I would get these questions. I haven't talked to very many people, or I haven't been able to talk to anyone at BNP Paribas before you, but I don't really get the tagline. What does "Bank for a Changing World" mean? Like, at least I know you did some research and had a conversation. So I think you can look at what is their value or the mission statement online, and then say, where have you seen the values or the mission statement in practice? So I think that's really important. I do think that another pitfall, I would say, as we're talking about pitfalls, is jumping the gun a bit in asking for referrals. And so oftentimes, I get asked the question from students, well, how do I know if I even need a referral? How do I ask for it? And I'm like, well, there's an adage out there. If you ask for advice, you get a job. If you ask for a job, you get advice. So I'm not a big fan of asking for the referral. I'm a big fan of saying, I really enjoyed this conversation. Is there anyone else at the firm I should be talking to? And that's sort of code for saying, do I need to be talking to someone about a referral? Do I need to be doing something? And so asking for an introduction to someone else will give you an indication of A, did they think you had a great conversation and want to give you a warm referral or a warm introduction? And B, if a referral is necessary, right? Because they'll know, if they have to give a referral, they'll be able to mention that. And I think that is just another pitfall that most people just say, hey, would you mind giving me a referral? Just don't do that. It's presumptuous, to use your word.
I would say it's presumptuous and it's off-putting. And I think I've told that to students, and sometimes they're very surprised because they want to be aggressive and they want to tell people what they want. But the reality is that these bankers know the deal.
Yeah.
They've been through this 100 times. They know exactly what your goal is.
Yeah.
They know that you want to get in it. That's so obvious that you don't need to talk about it, basically. Yeah. And the way you get the referral, it's going to happen naturally if you do a really good job by having an engaging conversation.
And you've built that relationship, and you've built that trust where they want to be that referral for you because you're a person that they can see sitting beside them working on pitch deck until 10 a.m. or 10
p.m. Frankly, if someone's too aggressive like that, it's a turnoff from a perspective of client services. I mean, this is a client services business. You have to understand how to navigate nuanced conversations and how are you representing yourself to a client and being very thoughtful. And that makes me be concerned. Like, I would worry about putting you in front of a client if you don't know when to be quiet, when to slow down, when to not be presumptuous. Those are some of the difficult things that are, the banks don't have time to teach you a lot of that stuff. You're going to, you need to come at least with a core skill set of navigating those situations. So So be careful. That is definitely a
Yep,
pitfall.
absolutely.
um, well, this has been fantastic, Stephanie. Networking is such a fascinating and complex topic, and it's one of those things everyone knows they're supposed to do it, but very few people do it really well until they get enough reps under their belt, and then some, then a lot of folks really start to excel. So the last thing I would just say is, if you're a student, if you're an aspiring club leader, maybe a VP in a club, and you want additional resources for your club, reach out to us at Adventus. You can contact me or Dave Lewicki, the founder, or even Stephanie. Ask us questions. There's a lot of things that we can do to help you get more additional resources for your club, whether that be relating to networking, financial modeling, technical prep, or a number of other things. So with that, I just want to say thank you, Stephanie, for your time. This has been a fantastic conversation, and I look forward to the next one.
Okay. Thanks, Ben.